Good morning and hi everyone. We will be doing social sciences for grade 7 today, and what I have got for you today is a history lesson. So the topic is the Sultanate period, and I'll just give you a brief of what we are going to do. So Sultanate period is known as Delhi Sultanate because the capital was based in Delhi. The Sultanate was said as Sultanate because all the kings were known as sultans. So it was all the Sultanate period was basically and majorly in the north of India. So in the Sultanate period, there were 5 dynasties that we are going to be reading about. And all these rulers, they came from either Afghanistan or were Turkish. So it was a new beginning for India in a sense that we got to understand a new Muslim culture. Islam came into India. Beautiful architecture was made, and it was a rule which was a absolute foreign rule. We had no idea about these they were not even traders, they were actually plunderers when they started. So we had no idea about these people before they came to India. But fortunately for the country, they also gave us a good administrative system, good revenue system. They kind of organized the country, especially the northern part of India. So as I said, there were 5 dynasties. So we will be reading about all the 5 dynasties. But this chapter, the Delhi Sultanate, has been divided into 2 parts. So today we are going to be only concentrating on the first part. So this is your chapter number 3, and pages would be 15 to 90. So we had Mamluk dynasty. If you can see the map also, you'll get an idea where all did they rule. So majorly, as you can see, southern part was only towards I think Tughlaq and Khilji dynasty. Otherwise, most of the kingdom that they had was based in the north part of India. So we had Tughlaqs, we had Sayyid, we had Khiljis, and we had Mamluk, the one that started the Delhi Sultanate. So that was the first dynasty that came across. So the period between 1206 to period between 1526. So 1526 was the time when the Mughals started. So the first battle of Panipat happened there. So between 1206 to 1526, the entire period is known as Delhi Sultanate. And then you can see it was a few centuries of this Sultanate rule that we had. So how did it actually start? So started with the military general of Gauri. So Gauri was a plunder. So the military general was Qutubuddin Aibak, who established the slave dynasty. Now this Qutubuddin Aibak was actually a slave of Gauri and hence started the slave dynasty. So the entire Delhi Sultanate had the slaves, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Sayyids and the Lodhi. Sayyid was a dynasty which was a very short dynasty. Now, how do we actually know about the Delhi Sultanate? So, this is one period where the chronicles are very, very important. The monuments are very important. So, if you ever visit the monuments that have been built by the Sultanate period sultans, you will find that they have written on the stone, engraved on the stone, so we can actually read what all happened. So, this was a historical period where you have most information about all the kings that ruled. So the first information that we have about this period called Sultanate period was the court chronicles. Now court chronicles means that there comes a person who is a well-known scholar and he is the one who participates in the court. So he's the one who's a part and parcel of the court, and sometimes the Sultan would ask a particular historian, a particular scholar to write something about him, to write the story about his period. And there were times that scholars who came from a different country would just stay in a court for some time and write about only that king or only that period. So this is a very, very valid and very interesting part of historical sources. So these were called court chronicles. So the famous one is Al-Baruni's Takit-e-Hind, Tariq-e-Firoz-Shahi. So he wrote about Firoz Shah. Then there was Amir Khusro. Amir Khusro was a very, very famous poet also. He has written Tughlaqnama. Sultan Firoz Shah has written Futuh-e Firoz Shahi. Yahya bin Ahmad has written Tariq-e-Mubarak Shahi. And Ni'amatullah has written Maqizai Afghan. So remember, they were all Afghanis and Turks. So these were the people who wrote about the history of that era or history of that particular sultan. The second one was the traveler's account. So many of the people visited India in those times, and the famous one, the picture that you see, is of Marco Polo. So Ibn Battuta was one of them. Ibn Battuta was so famous that he was also sent to China by the Sultan as a what do you say now, as a envoy from the Sultan. So Al-Baruni was another one who came from a different country. Marco Polo was from Morocco, and Nikitin. So these were foreigners who visited India at that time and wrote about the kings that they saw in that era. Then, as I said, that historical monuments. So you can see the Qutub Minar, you can see Quwwatul Mislam Masjid, that is a very famous masjid in Delhi, then Lodi Tomb and Firoz Shah Kotla. So even now we have Firoz Shah Kotla grounds also, where you have cricket matches played. So these are the architecture that has been very, very famous in all the times that we are living. Even now, if you want to go and see, you get a ticket and you can see. So even now, these monuments built by these sultans are fetching revenue for the government of India. So if you want to know more about history, you can always visit these monuments and learn more about that era. Now, we are going to start. The first one was the slave dynasty. As I said, that he was, Qutbuddin Aibak was a slave, and this was your Mamluk dynasty. So this is Qutbuddin Aibak. That's how he looks like. If you can see, he really looks like dressed up, really, really nice. So ordained with headgear and everything, and wearing a bright red and yellow gown kind of a thing. So he was a slave of Muhammad Ghori, and he was the one who was, when Muhammad Ghori annexed India, or when he conquered India, not annexed but conquered India, that was the time that Qutbuddin Aibak was the governor. He had his military headquarters in Indraprasth, that is the new modern Delhi, and he declared independence. So he declared his own dynasty in Delhi when his king Ghori died. So he ruled only for 4 years, 1206 to 1210. The former military general of Muhammad Ghori was the first Sultan of Delhi Sultanate. He was the only Sultan who belonged to the Mamluk tribe, and the others were from Ilabari tribe of Turks. He was a kind-hearted and a generous ruler. He was also known as Laksh Baksh. Laksh Baksh means when a person is very, very generous, when a person is very magnanimous and believes in charity. So it means that you are donating lakhs and lakhs of treasure to your public, to your people who you are ruling. So he was a generous ruler, and that's why his another name was Laksh Baksh. There were two problems that he faced in his rule. The regional rulers in the northern India. So regional rulers in the northern India were mostly from Rajasthan, the Rajput rulers. Then the Turkish nobles who refused to accept him as sultan because he was a slave. But he faced these two problems by suppressing all of them. So he's the one who built Qutub Minar and Quwwatul Islam Mosque in Delhi, and while he was playing polo, he fell from his horse in 1210 and he died while playing that. So he died in Lahore. After Qutbuddin Aibak comes Iltumish. So now Iltumish was the son-in-law of Aibak and he was also a slave. But how does he become the Sultan? Because he was the son-in-law of Qutbuddin's Aibak daughter whose name was Sultana. So that is why Iltumish becomes the ruler. So if you see, it is the succession is not related to only sons. It is not that if a king, if the sultan dies, only the son can be the ruler. So here the line of succession was not organized in a sense that only the son would rule. So Iltumish was the son-in-law of Qutbuddin Aibak. Now, what all did he achieve while ruling India? See, he allowed grants of Jagirs. Jagirs is a land, an agricultural land that you can give to your nobles. So, why did he give? Because he thought that if I started granting these Jagirs to the nobles, they are going to be happy, and ultimately, even if I am a slave, they are going to accept me as their sultan. So while the Turkish nobles were happy with the land that was given to them, he was happy to suppress the internal revolts that actually happened only by the Turkish nobles. He reorganized the nobles into a selected group of Chalisa. Chalisa means 40, and he also called them Turkan-e-Chahalgami. Now, after he dies, this Chalisa becomes very, very powerful and very, very strong. He also introduced the Ikta system. Now, Ikta system is where you are donating or where you are giving or gifting lands to those nobles and others in lieu of salary. So, you pay a salary to the noble and you give the land to the nobles, and in turn the nobles are going to give something to the treasure of the state. He introduced two kinds of coins and they were made of silver and copper. So silver was tanka and copper was jital. So Qutbuddin Aibak had built Qutub Minar. He also added two more floors to that minar to make it to the height that it is now. So these were the achievements of Iltumish. So granting of grants of land, he introduced the Ikta system, the Chalisa and Qutub Minar. After Iltumish dies, his son becomes the ruler for only some time. So his name was Runuddin Firoz Shah. But what happens is that he was a very, very weak ruler and he was very, very fond of alcohol. So even his senses were not very intelligent. So Razia Sultan is the one that comes on the throne. But see, this is the first woman that we have, especially a Muslim ruler who is a woman, but she's not there for a very, very long time. As you can see, she was there for only 4 years, and even then the nobles did not accept a woman as the ruler. So she was the daughter of Iltumish, and the nobles did not agree with this decision of Iltumish. Iltumish knew that his son would not prove to be a good ruler because he was a weak king and could not control his empire. Hence, in a few months' time, Razia came back to power, but her reign was short-lived as the nobles just could not accept a woman as their queen, and she died fighting the nobles. So this is how Razia Sultan looked like. After Razia Sultan is Balban, who comes on the throne. So if you can see that they were all very short-lived eras or short-lived reign of these Sultanate rulers. But Balban was one who ruled from 1266 to 86, so which means whole 20 years. So he was one of the Chalisa of Iltumish, but his nobles in Chalisa were his enemies, and that is why he abolishes this group which Iltumish formed, the group of noble Chalisa. His policy was famously known as iron and blood, and he was a very, very strong ruler. So he punished the rebellions without any mercy, and that is why his rule was always called iron and blood. So iron means a lot of strength, and blood means whenever there was a rebellion, whenever there was a war, he punished them and he killed them. He fortified the northwestern boundary against the invasion of Mongols. Then he believed in the supremacy and introduced the Persian custom of sajda. So sajda is when you're kneeling and you're touching your forehead on the ground where your sultan is sitting. So that is sajda. And paibas is when you're kissing the feet of the sultan. So he believed in that sultan is just like a god. He died in 1286, but his successors were very weak, and that is why we had Dynasty of Khilji. So Khilji dynasty was between 1290 to 1320, and the first one was Jalaluddin Khilji. Now Jalaluddin Khilji, when he came, he was very, very old and he was not a very strong leader, and he adopted a very, very lenient policy towards the Mongols. Now remember, Mongols were the one who were always coming, attacking and plundering the wealth of the country. He even arranged a marriage, one of their nobles, with his daughter. So because he was very, very weak and very old, he was killed by his own son-in-law, who was also his nephew, and that's a very famous one called Alauddin Khilji. Now this Alauddin Khilji was the very, very powerful and ambitious ruler of Khilji dynasty, and he wanted to be a world conqueror just like Alexander. He's very, very famous. There was a movie, and I will just tell you in the next slide why is he very famous for. So when he establishes an empire, he also introduced a lot of economic reforms because he wanted funds for his military ambition. So he ordered his authorities for measurement of all agricultural land. So as they measured, the revenue also increased. Now he raised the revenue in the Doab region. Now Doab region is one region which was very, very fertile, and he made sure that when the nobles were collecting the revenue and putting it into the state treasury, they did not take it away for their personal use. He also tried to control the market price so that the people were happy that they did not have to spend more money on the day-to-day expenditure. And because he wanted the control of the price, he kept a watch on the shopkeepers through his officers so that there was no corruption. So all in all, he made sure that the state gets a lot of revenue so that he can fund his military operations. So reforms and strength in the army, he improved the revenue policy as I just told you so that he could have money to raise a strong and a capable army. He also had this branding of horses. So the horses were branded on the quality. So if the inferior race of horses were branded differently than the superior race of horses. Then there was a face reading policy that started with the soldier. So you look at the face and you decide that the soldier is going to be brave or he's not, he's a weak person. He also had a wide network of spies so that he could get all the information from the enemy kingdom. And once he had the information, then he could go and attack. So expansion policy of Alauddin Khilji, he wanted to conquer the north. He did conquer Gujarat and Malwa, and this gave him control over the western coastal areas. Now remember, western coastal areas are again very, very good with agriculture. So the more agriculture, the more tax and the more money you get into the treasury. He attacked and captured Ranthambore and Chittor. Now Chittor is a very famous, basically Alauddin Khilji is famous for this Padmavati. So Padmavat was written by Muhammad Jaisi. We also had this movie which was based on Kutubuddin, which was based on this capture. So he goes, Rana Ratan Singh is the one who's the king or the ruler of Chittor. He captures, Rana Ratan Singh escapes after he's been captured. And then he's again attacked by Khilji. He wanted to actually get Padmavati, who was supposed to be a very, very beautiful queen. But the moment Khilji attacks for the second time, Padmavati, along with the other women and the queen, performs Johar, that is dying by fire. Now, Alauddin Khilji is also famous. He was the first ruler who goes and conquers Deccan. Deccan is conquers south. So his famous slave, Malik Kafur, he was the one who was sent to defeat Devagiri, Warangal, Madurai, etc. And because of them, because of Malik Kafur and the army, they all started paying a tribute to the annual, to the state treasury. So this was an annual tribute, and then after this, Tughlaq dynasty came when Alauddin Khilji dies. And Alauddin Khilji also did not have a very, very strong successor. So these were a few dynasties that we learned today in the Sultanate period, part 1, and we are going to continue with the other dynasties in part number 2. So remember, we have 5 dynasties. We finished with, I think, 2 or 3. So have fun. Bye-bye.